Well, hello everybody, and thank you for coming. It is really humbling to be here because my background is in machine learning and AI, and I am new to the whole field of openEHR, which is amazing. Bart, my co-founder, introduced me to your community, and it's been incredible. So I decided to talk today about something that kept my mind busy, and it's a thought experiment that I would like us to think together and hopefully have something to talk about afterwards. So I'm going to talk about how openEHR can enable scalable and auditable AI in healthcare, something that doesn't exist right now. We are trying hard to bring AI into healthcare, but we haven't yet managed to crack the code. So let's review some basics. We all know that the data cycle management is quite tricky in healthcare. For example, there is data heterogeneity and coupling problem, which means whatever is built for hospital A according to their data schema doesn't necessarily translate to hospital B. Another problem is ambiguity in semantics. There is clinical notes, there are just write-ups, there are all kinds of data scattered without any agreement in terms of semantic. One more problem that we know of is a lack of universal versioning. This sort of like traceability and version control is a problem, especially to many people who build these AI agents for healthcare. That is something that needs to be worked hard on because like the background is different. And another thing is poor usability, because every agent must be rewired, retrained, remapped. There is a lot that goes into it before it can be used by another hospital. And of course, above all, is the integration cost, because often these agents are built in the form of an app, and even if not, and they are to be integrated into existing UI, there is a lot of cost into shuffling things around to make room for these agents, and creating the whole structure around making them operational. Between all these demons, the king of them is data heterogeneity. So this is really a big problem, especially when we think about the proprietary systems that make it really difficult to communicate and use data across systems. Now, this audience, of course, knows that openEHR has solved many of these problems. But the question remained, why, despite solving many of these problems, AI agents still fail to scale? And why do we still talk about auditability for AI agents? So let's just remember that openEHR, it provides semantic interoperability and standardized data structure. However, the whole notion hasn't yet made its way into the way AI agents operate. And what I'm proposing here is for us to think about, can we come up with a standardized agent communication pattern that can help us do this workflow integration seamless and easy? And I believe openEHR is the native data ground to make this possible, and any other way of accessing and processing data will fail to do this. And I'll tell you why. So think for a moment, the way AI agent architecture works and the way openEHR's reference models work, there's a beautiful mapping between the two. So AI agents, they do reasoning, okay? And the way they do is they first need to sense. And the way the sensing happens is a query via AQL. Then they need to plan. And the planning happens by generating a suggestion archetype. Once the planning is done, they need to act on it. So they write to a task or they do an instruction. And then at the end, they can also explain all by themselves. They can log via version audit trail. So AI agents can do all of these things, and as you can see, there is a mapping that can happen there. Now, this provides us with an opportunity that doesn't yet exist, and this is something we should think about developing, and that is defining naming conventions for agent actions in clinical knowledge management so that it enables seamless AI integration. Because as you know better than me, it's not always about just reading, but it's also creating an entire trail of how an AI agent interacts with this data, processes it, and what happens to that processed data. I'll give you an example later. So here is a proposal that I have. I'm not saying this is complete or anything. This is just a food for thought. And the suggestion is that when we think about AI agents, we need to create a layer by openEHR so that it sits, of course, the natural place for it to be between the user interface and the openEHR repository. But it has to also have standardized interfaces so that there are common APIs and archetypes that enable plug and play agent modules. And we need to also make it the audit and provenance happening by AI agents logging all the versions in the openEHR. So the agents themselves can do that. And here is an example. So think about a voice assistant in a ward round, where a doctor has their assistant and they're going through the ward. And suppose the doctor asks the agent, the assistant, summarize Mr. Jones's overnight vitals and highlight abnormal lab results. So this is a high-level language that the doctor is using in a conversation with the assistant. So the first thing the AI agent needs to do is to do a command recognition and comprehension. It needs to understand intent. It needs to understand that, well, the things this person is asking me to do is to look in overnight vitals and labs. So that's the first stage that will happen. And after that, it will do a query to the AQL so that to understand like the things that it needs to find, but then it needs to process this data and come up with a suggestion. What would that be? Oh, Mr. Jones's blood pressure was low and the potassium level was fine, but his iron level was high, something like that. So this is something that the agent has used. It has kind of processed and manipulated data in a new way. And now this needs to be logged somewhere. It needs to be auditable, and it needs to be traceable, and it needs to be understood by other agents elsewhere, either in the system or another hospital or however, so that they can access it in a standardized way. So the suggestion here is, can we come up with a definition like an assistant suggestion archetype? Because this is a new kind of information that needs to be logged. And then, of course, then the rest will happen, the data retrieval and everything. So this standardized AI-generated clinical recommendation in this example can make this modularity much more transferable between different places. So the question is, why standardized AI-generated data? Why does that lower the risk? So one of them is that the portability and reuse. As we said, because there's this archetype that is defined for these AI agents, it makes the reusability much higher. There is a shared investment because the agent modules, they can be developed in a marketplace, shared across institutions, and then they speak a language that is understood, that this is whatever that is being read, it was generated by an agent. And of course, the most importantly is the clinical safety, because these they are versioned, and it enables the legal and regulatory acceptance that is much needed, because there are a lot of concerns around AI agents when it comes to regulatory acceptance. This leads to challenges and open problems. One of them would be the latency and performance. Real-time or near real-time query with complex AQL can take time. But my prediction is that with advancement of technology, software, hardware, and all the things that we are doing, hopefully this can resolve and at least become better. There is a governance and model drift, which is the responsibility of those who are building these AI agents, because the AI agents must produce auditable, explainable outputs that are mapped to clinical models. This safety and explainability is critical, so this is something that extra effort needs to be put into. But the most important of them all is the adoption and ecosystem building. This is the thing that is really in the hands of the many who are pushing this frontier forward, because the community has to converge on an agent semantic layer. This has to be a definition we have to agree upon. What does that mean? How would it sit? How would the whole structure look like? So my thought is that we need to define a shared agent archetype library or suggestion layer. And we need to build open reference implementations of agent orchestration over openEHR. And we need to encourage pilot deployments to test performance, safety, and interface patterns. Because unless, of course, we float it, we don't know how it sails. And we need to co-build a module marketplace to avoid reinventing assistance in silos. Because as Bart mentioned earlier today, there is this swarm intelligence that is going to be an emergent property of these AI agents once they start working together. And we don't need to always be sitting in the crossroad of all these agents interacting with each other. There will come a time where they will interact with each other. So we do need to define all those standards for how they will interact with each other, read, write, and communicate. And with that, I leave you. Thank you.